Welcome back. Off the Record starts right now. On this edition of OTR, we have Stephanie Cepak and Kyle Melinn, along with Ron Dzwonkowski. Now here's the rundown. The governor moves on reviewing the books in Detroit. The bully bill is signed, and the governor makes a personal disclosure. Later on, we'll be joined by Jessup, who is heading a petition drive to stop the emergency manager law. All this and more coming up right now. Off the Record.
Getting the inside out. It's Off the Record with senior Capitol correspondent Tim Skubick and his Capitol Press Corps colleagues.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by a grant from Truscott-Rossman, Michigan's only bipartisan strategic communications firm, serving statewide, national, and international clients from their offices in Lansing, Detroit, and Grand Rapids. TruscottRossman.com. By the Michigan Food and Beverage Association, in conjunction with the Michigan Business and Professional Association, working together for its members. Membership information on the web at michbusiness.org. And by Hager Fox Heating and Air Conditioning Company, providing comfort to mid-Michigan homes and businesses since 1941. Hager Fox and Bryant, for whatever it takes. On the web at hagerfox.com.
And now this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubick.
Thank you, Joe Donovan. Welcome to our show this week. The governor finally moves on the emergency manager plan, although he says he doesn't know if he'll end up there, but he started the preliminary review. How come, Ron?
He started the preliminary review because the law says that if the city and the city mayor and the city council can't come to terms on a plan that makes sense, the state has to go in. So now they're talking about, instead of an emergency manager, this sort of halfway measure that would be a consent decree. Mayor Dave Bing said just this morning he's not even interested in a consent decree. They're going to try to solve this themselves and give the state some numbers that the state will buy. I think that's unlikely.
This is a huge challenge for this new governor.
It is. I mean, he's repeatedly says that he doesn't want to go into the city. He doesn't want to follow the footsteps of Governor Engler, as everybody remembers with the school takeover. But, you know, the financial situation is what it is. And he probably will need to go that route, and they're, you know, slowly creeping in with this financial review, but it'll probably go down that route.
He also always makes a point of saying there's a lot of good things that are happening in Detroit. We don't want to overshadow the good things. We want to keep the momentum going with people like Dan Gilbert coming into the city, bringing employees into the city, and we need to get these unpleasant things out of the way, which makes me think that the CPA and this governor has something in mind, like some sort of quick rinse bankruptcy that they went through with GM, although he would certainly not use the bankruptcy word. But he would really like to, you know, get the fiscal house in order in a very rushed way, and so that next year at this time the city's on sound financial footing. That's where I think he's headed. I don't know how you do that without an emergency manager.
It's starting to look a lot familiar, doesn't it? I mean, the state having to come into the city of Detroit and have to clean up a mess that the politicians there don't want to have to do because they don't want to go crossways with the employee unions. And this is really what it looks like the situation is. I mean, how much you want to gut the contracts of the employee unions, and can you get any good concessions out of them to make the budget balanced? And if you can't, then you just go ahead and let the state come in, but at the same time play the political angle and say, hey, we can solve this ourselves, and then, but secretly just go ahead and just continue the path of not doing anything, let the state come in, blame them for having to make the tough decisions, at the same time saying, hey, we never wanted the state to come in at the same time. That way you get the results you want because the state did it, and you can play the blame game and blame it on the state for having to come in and do it in the first place.
Well, or simply put, the city can say, we didn't invite you in. The state can say, we didn't want to come in. They can say the numbers simply required us to do it.
Right, exactly. So there's plausible deniability for everyone. And at the end of the game, basically the employees are going to have to take big cuts that they didn't want to have to take, and they didn't have to make any concessions. They can blame it on this EM law.
Here is the secret hope, I think, of this administration, that triggering this 30-day review of the books, which won't take 30 days, by the way, they'll have the numbers within the week or so, will provide the motivation for the local folks to handle this on their own. If they say
motivation, it's a hammer.
Well, all right, it is a hammer.
Yeah.
It's two hammers. If you don't want us coming in, boys and girls, then get this job done.
Well, I mean, it already did before when you had Mayor Bing make his speech about the city, and then, you know, the 4-second reaction from the governor was that he expects to have the mayor requesting this financial review. That was a couple of weeks ago, and then with that statement. Then you had the city council meeting, before Thanksgiving and trying to get things going, because they do feel that this is an odorous burden coming down from them.
This is like
state.
trying to give a little child medicine that they don't want to take.
Well, I suppose
you could swallow it on your own, or we can pour it down your throat.
And I think the issue everybody would be happier politically with a consent decree where we don't have to actually appoint a czar to come in and run the city of Detroit. I think the problem there that the governor is concerned about is the city's accountability. Will the city hold up? Can the city hold up its end of a consent decree without somebody who can actually come in there and make the tough decisions? And so far, the city does not have a good track record on making tough decisions.
Well, and you have this thing where you already have Roy Roberts running DPS as the emergency managers, and we've already seen the media coverage and all the problems there. So you have these two two emergency managers that are making really tough cuts, and it'll be probably a really big nightmare.
Coleman Young Jr., state senator, Detroit, said simply, I don't believe the governor when he says he doesn't want to send in an emergency manager. He believes there's been a, quote, discussion for a long period of time about the state coming in, the conspiracy theory of history. Mr. Melinn.
No, I mean, that's all great cover. I mean, it's all great political cover. But you really think that Rick Snyder wants to go in and run the city of Detroit? I mean, really? I mean, what's the benefit of that? I mean, the question is, who wants to make the tough decisions down there? I mean, if the mayor and the city council and the labor unions all wanted to get together and have a press conference and bang on the governor for doing what he's doing so far, how come they can't get together and make the numbers work? They haven't been able to make the numbers work.
Well, doing the news conference is easy. All you got to do is show up.
Yeah,
There's no heavy lifting there.
I mean, finally they're able to get together and do a news conference. How come they can't make the numbers work? They can't make their own numbers work.
News conference is talk, and talk is much different than action. And I think when you mentioned the political aspects of this, Governor met with the Free Press editorial board earlier this week, and it was one of the first times I've heard him talk about, he said, I'm in pretty good shape for 2014. Remember before he wasn't even talking about 2014? Right. In terms of political consequences, he can weather the political storm of going into Detroit and fixing it far better than Mayor Dave Binger, members of the city council, who have to answer to the city's voters.
Well, he's not going to get any votes in Detroit anyway.
Right. And he can say, I'm the guy who finally got in there and fixed Detroit.
But take this to the bank. If at the end of the day there is not an agreement and they can't do the consent decree, will he pull the trigger on sending in an EM?
So.
Well, absolutely he will.
He will.
Yeah, I mean, there will be one.
Yeah.
And I think Joe Harris, the former city auditor, who's now the EM in Benton Harbor, is waiting in the wings for the call.
Well, the mayor said he would like to do it too. I think that has no chances.
No,
I don't think that's going to happen.
And in fact, the mayor has said he would like to do it, he wouldn't like to do it, he'd like to do it, he wouldn't like to do it.
He was before it, before he was against it.
I think that's still a possibility, though, because what you would have then is somebody who's actually been elected by the city who could do the job.
Not going to happen, Kyle.
Well, I'm just telling you. I think I'm not taking it off the table. I think it's still a possibility.
You can't make. He'd have to be making decisions with political consequences in mind.
He's running next year.
Right.
Precisely. Okay, so you want to revise your remarks?
No, I'm not, because who's to say that he is going to run again? I mean, maybe he'll just do the job, get the job done, and leave.
All right, the governor signs the anti-bullying bill and makes a personal disclosure, which was very, very interesting.
Yes, he disclosed that throughout elementary school, middle school, and continued onward that he was bullied. And that I don't know if that it was very emotional, and obviously there was a lot of families there of children that had been bullied and had some very tragic results. So it was a very emotional press conference.
What'd you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, he swallowed hard when he talked about it, and I think we all kind of thought, well, it probably did happen to him. I mean, he is the professed nerd.
In my wildest imagination, I never thought of that.
Oh, well, I mean, he was a nerd in school. Yeah. He was the smartest kid in the class.
We all were nerds in school.
Yeah, but think about the situation. Than a lot of the other kids in the same grades he was in, because he moved along faster than other kids. So he would be, I mean, classic bullying. He would be a classic bullying target.
And look, unlike others who might have older brothers or in the school system or relatives, I mean, he was a kid that didn't have any older brothers in the school system at the same time who would have stuck up for him. And, when you're in that different nerdy class, and maybe I thought about this because I was the nerd in school, kind of, it's a different type of position that you're in, and you do get picked on because you are smarter than maybe some other folks. And I'm not speaking from my own experience, but it does happen, and it doesn't surprise me.
My older brothers bullied me.
Well, yeah, but they wouldn't let anybody else bully you, though, right?
No.
I think not only it was a personal story, that obviously was a personal day, but it also took away the fact that we had this, wrangling on the issue of anti-bullying between the House and the Senate, and what was in and what was not in, and then obviously the most recent debate was over this moral conviction and religious belief statement to exempt that, and I think
whole thing that held up Michigan as a laughing stock nationally,
and it transformed that discussion.
It was an unusual side of the a governor that I don't think you see very often. He does not wear his emotions on his sleeve at all.
You wouldn't describe him as a self-disclosure.
No.
He would not be a fan of Leo Biscaglia.
But I think he was
for your public TV folks, okay?
Right. He was genuinely proud to be part of signing this and addressing the issue. The sad thing is that Michigan had to be the 48th of the 50 states.
Well, and let's also put this in reality, okay? Signing legislation and mandating that schools come up with a policy does not equate to no bullying in the schools, guys.
No, but I think that it brings an awareness among school administrators, among teachers that maybe feel that, you know, while they sometimes would have let something go in the hallway, maybe they'd step in now.
This has gotten an enormous amount of attention over the last several months. Attention that I don't think any of us thought that this was going to get at the beginning of the year. And to cap it off, the governor's press conference, which I think got a lot of attention. I think people who are advocating an end to bullying in school, I think, got to declare a big victory on this.
And it gives the kids who are bullied now, they may have more reason to come forward and complain,
Right.
and that's a good thing.
All right, let's call in our guest now and talk about efforts to stop the emergency manager law, which a petition drive is going on towards that end. Brendan Jessup is chair and CEO of Michigan Forward, an organization that wants to block implementation of the emergency manager law and let the voters decide its fate next year in November. His group is collecting signatures towards that end. He's been active in other petition drives and is an outstanding alumnus of EMU and an advisor to the Michigan NAACP. Mr. Jessup, welcome to the program, and Stephanie's got the first question.
Great, thanks for having me.
Yesterday we saw, you know, discussions in the public about lawmakers discussing a new EM bill and getting around basically your petition drive. Has your group begun discussions about what to do now that those conversations are being had?
Yeah, I mean, we're discussing it, but that's actually giving more fire to our campaign. Now we see more people collecting more signatures. We're ramping up even harder, not just in Detroit now, but also across the state. Because a lot of people are standing up for democracy, and they believe in our message.
Do you think that you'll get the signatures in earlier to try to avoid this unless the lawmakers act next week?
Well, our point is to freeze the law and to put on the ballot for 2012. And we're not going to let Lansing rush our process. We believe in due process, and that's what we're really pushing for now. We have questions about the preliminary review of Detroit's finances going through so quickly when our deficit is supposed to be or stored to be almost $10 billion for the long term. So how can we can do a thorough review in 6 days? That's a question we have to the governor and to the state treasurer.
Brandon, what's your interpretation of what would happen if you guys are successful, get your signatures, and you freeze PA4? What happens?
Well, what happens is we freeze PA4 and we can restore democracy for the meantime.
What happens? Does PA72 come back so we still would have an emergency manager?
No, actually, the state law PA4, the third paragraph right before the very end says that Public Act 4 repeals Public Act 72. You will see that in the language. I actually have a petition right behind the set, and it'll show you that. So by us freezing this law, we still repeal PA 72, and Lansing has to go draw a whole new law for the books.
So chaos would ensue. We'd have no emergency manager option for Detroit.
I don't think that's chaos. I think it's actually the people asking for a better option for communities that are facing fiscal crisis
You told
across the
Bloomberg
country.
News Service this week it's nothing but a takeover bill. This is definitely a race issue. Come on, isn't this a fiscal management issue? The city's broke. It's not going to be able to pay its bills in April. What's that got to do with race?
It is a fiscal management issue, and the reason why race is a factor here. Every community that has an emergency manager right now is minority controlled, a minority majority community. And we have questions to the state governor and to our treasurer as to how he's levying this law across communities across the state. We know that last year the House Fiscal Agency reported that over 150 school districts could be in financial distress this year. Governor Snyder, I believe in April, said that this is an early warning system. We don't see any of this early warning right now. There are no tools to prepare fiscal governments or local governments for early warning of a fiscal emergency. And right now it's kind of a shock to see the state coming in so fast with the city of Detroit, also Flint, Inkster, Ecorse, with a takeover bill that really doesn't solve the problem.
Do you believe he wants to send in an EM to run Detroit?
Yes, he said it.
When did he say that?
He said, I believe, a few weeks ago. He's reluctantly saying it. He's saying that, well, you know, I don't want to bring in an EM.
I don't want to send.
I don't want to bring in an EM, but he's starting the process. He doesn't want to run Detroit. He won't run Detroit. He'll send a political appointee to run Detroit, and that's what we don't want to have. We don't need any more appointees. That's big government. We want the process to take its place. We want the people to be involved in how we turn around the city of Detroit, and also how we can build a better system for communities in fiscal emergencies. That's what we really need.
You know, it's terrific to see younger people, and I know you've got a lot of younger people in Detroit engaged in public policy on this issue. Also, though, you've said you're politically ambitious. You told an interviewer you'd like to be president of the United States someday. So,
yes.
I mean, this is a nice vehicle for you to ride to political visibility. Aren't you just advancing your own ambitions here?
Well, no, that's not at all. I come from a long family of activists. My parents are union members. My mom was a college activist in New Orleans, my hometown. My community speaks up and stands up for democracy, and this is about one person, one vote. Political ambitions, honestly, that's not my concern right now. I want to make sure I can vote first before I discover.
Right, bring us up to speed.
Politics.
How many signatures do you have?
157,000, roughly.
And you want to get, what's your pad? What number do you want to get to?
Our goal is 250,000 petitions.
All right, and when do you think you'll get to 250,000, and when will you file?
Well, we have to file before March 2012. And
You'll get in before that?
We definitely will.
After the first of the year?
I don't know yet. Definitely
are you willing to predict success?
Yes, I'm willing to predict success, and I'm predicting success based on the amount of support that we've received from across the state, not just Detroit, but places like Traverse City, Sheboygan County, Grand Rapids, Benton Harbor, clearly Pontiac, Saginaw, all across the state. So I'm predicting success because the people of Michigan are speaking up for democracy, and they're growing and multiplying in numbers.
Well, I mean, obviously you need a cushion on the signatures, but you need what? Constitutionally, you need about 162,000. So if you're already at 157,000, why don't you do a bigger push and get it in? Because otherwise, Lansing's going to come in and basically thwart your efforts for months on end. You know?
Yeah, we are doing a bigger push. On December 17th, we're planning a Democracy Day. We're asking for Michigan voters to come and sign our petition at sites all across the state. Yesterday, we secured 6 sites in Grand Rapids, which is a huge push for us. We're seeing more conservative communities now standing up for democracy, speaking up for due process and for worker rights and voter rights.
You got Tea Party folks?
I don't know yet. We don't ask them their political affiliations. It's nonpartisan campaign.
If this is really about democracy, I mean, turnout in Detroit elections has been pathetic in the last couple of elections, including to adopt a new city charter. Doesn't it seem to you that the people of the city of Detroit would rather have the police come when they call, and if that requires an emergency manager to get the city on sound financial footing and keep the paychecks coming for the police force in April when the city says when the mayor says the city's going to run out of money, aren't they more interested in that than in who is actually running the city? They didn't turn out to even vote for the people that are now in office.
Well, right now, the city of Detroit sees an issue that they believe in, and they believe in democracy. So we're not concerned about turnout in 2012. You know that this issue will bring out Detroit, Flint, Ecorse, and all the core communities in the state. What Detroiters want, we want to make sure we have enough police officers to cover the city. We can't do that with the emergency manager. What emergency managers do, they cut. They lay off police officers, they lay off public safety workers, they lay off EMT guys, they lay off our firefighters. So we can't have this in a city that's already drowned.
If the city doesn't go the same route, I mean, say the city council and the mayor come to terms on an agreement, it's also going to involve some layoffs. I mean, the city's got to make some cuts. They don't have the money.
The city is in a very peculiar financial situation, and it's interesting to see now we have some of our Congress people stepping up to the bat. Congressman Hanson Clark introduced the Detroit Jobs Trust Act. I think that's a great way to actually build a safety net for our core communities.
The one
in the
that
state.
funnels all the federal tax money into the city?
The one that will actually take Detroit tax dollars and will bring and return them back to the city, yes. But it's a model for other urban communities across the country. Chicago has a $6 million deficit. It's not the fact that our cities need a bailout, but we have to have an urban agenda. Governor Snyder doesn't have an urban agenda. He doesn't have an agenda for our core communities, and he's shown that when he cut revenue sharing without a plan.
Do you think he's trying to bust up the unions?
Absolutely. Why would you go and create a law that gives one person the power to cancel any public contract, not just collective bargaining rights, but public contracts with vendors that supply the city?
Isn't that what this law is all about, though? PA4 is only really different from PA72, the old EM law, in that the emergency manager can break up union contracts.
Well, PA72 is actually, you had some court battles, you had a lot more public interest and public input in PA72. After many court fights with DPS and Robert Bobb, now you see these supermen on steroids created by Public Act 4. I'm sorry. Public Act 4 gives not only exclusives and huge powers to emergency managers to have both sides of government at their control, the executive branch and the legislative branch. We saw Joe Harris in Benton Harbor rewrite the city charter just this past election year. But unfortunately, fortunately, Benton Harbor turned away his changes to their city charter. The people of Benton Harbor didn't want the emergency manager rewriting their city charter.
But it would seem like you guys would rather have PA4 because the emergency manager can then just maybe cut the salaries and cut the benefits of the workers, as opposed to PA72 where they could just lay off workers.
PA4 is not an option. We will take PA4 off the books. What we would rather see is a stronger treasurer to come in with specialists and to help our communities work through the financial problems that they have. It's not an isolated issue of Detroit. If Detroit has a financial problem, the state has a financial problem, and that's where we need to go. We need to have more cooperation from the state and a real working mechanism to solve our fiscal issues.
Who are the groups that are helping fund your campaign?
Well, we have a lot of public support from labor unions, clearly, the Michigan Educators Association. The Teamsters they've now joined on into this fight. We are the people, the coalition of labor unions, but also the bulk of the labor, the share of the labor, has been from communities all across the state. In Traverse City, we got a great community group called Reject Emergency Managers that actually blew past their goal of 5,000 and turned in over 30,000 petitions.
From Traverse City?
From Traverse City, absolutely. And that included that upper north area of the state.
Mm-hmm. Were you amazed by that?
I was definitely amazed, but that's the foundation of this campaign. This is democracy at work.
But look,
right
the
now.
governor says the reason we have this law is to prevent cities from going into bankruptcy, and we are moving up the process to deal with the problem before we get to the cliff. Doesn't that make sense?
The way you back away from the cliff is actually job creation and increasing the tax bases in our core communities.
But that's not going to happen by April. And in April, the city runs out of money, according to Mayor Bing.
And I'll say this.
So what happens between now and then?
This year, the Senate Fiscal Agency and the Senate House Agency are predicting a surplus in cash for the state of Michigan. The state of Michigan has to think about whether they'll look at the core communities.
Would you think for a second lawmakers are going to vote extra money to send into Detroit to save the city?
This is not for Detroit, and it shouldn't be for Detroit only. We should look at how do we provide a safety net for our core communities in the state. This is not just a Detroit-only issue. This is a statewide issue. Our school districts are running out of cash. Our communities are running out of cash.
All right, so you want the Republicans in the legislature to give more money in revenue sharing?
That's a start.
And you think that's the solution?
I think that's a start.
Well, the governor would say that's not the solution because you've got problems with pensions, which are long-term, which they aren't going to be funded. So getting back to Public Act 4, isn't it a way to prevent these problems?
No, it's not. Public Act 4, what it does, what Public Act 4 does, it really doesn't, it kicks the can down the road. And the DPS, we began with a deficit in the millions and the single-digit millions. Now we have a long-term deficit, $327 million. This is my generation that has to pay that deficit back. And long after Governor Snyder is going out of office, I'm still here paying taxes. I don't want to have a $327 million deficit over my school district. I enjoy DPS. I want to see DPS getting better, but we can't do that by kicking the can down the road.
So DPS hasn't gotten any better uncovering all this money, the deficit, and uncovering the problems?
Absolutely not, because right now you still have some school classrooms with 60 kids in a classroom. This is under emergency management. This is what we're getting. This is what we're still paying for.
You've heard the chatter this week that lawmakers might try to do a mini EM bill to address some of these concerns if this law goes on hold and your petition drive is successful. React to that.
Well, it's a start. Once again, I'm glad to see the legislature starting to do something, but they haven't invited the community to the table to even draft this legislation. So once again, this is another nearsighted attempt, not really to solve the solution, to be a solution to the problem, but to thwart our attempts at democracy and to restore due process. So would you be willing to
participate? And because the bill isn't anywhere, it's not on law. If they said, come on, sit down, help us draft something that will work.
Absolutely.
Would you be willing to participate?
We could talk about it all day long.
Take your petition drive off the table?
No, I would not take our petition drive off the table. It's not an option.
But at the end of the day, though, addressing the the city employee situation has to be dealt with. So is the preferred option to lay off employees or to reduce the salary and benefits of the employees that work there?
I'm not in a position to say that right now. I would rather see Detroit do a full review of his finances and all his options. What I will say is that right now we have 16 tax collectors for our city. We normally operate at 45. These 45 tax collectors would go out and collect not just the individual taxes that were delinquent to the city, but also corporate taxes. Last Thursday at a public meeting that the city council had, we had quite a few city employees say that we could be back in the black if we were able to just do our jobs. Right now,
you mean collect $151 million in taxes, Detroit says?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's the start. Once again, why don't we just collect what's delinquent to us?
Are you guys paying for signatures?
No, we're not. This is 100% volunteer-led campaign.
And what's your budget? How much have you raised?
How much have you raised? Oh man, very few dollars, to be honest with you.
Well, who paid for the petitions?
Our petitions were donated by Michigan Education Association, Michigan Ask Me Council 25, and a few other organizations as well.
And when did you start?
We started June 18th, 2011.
Some people would say that this is just to collect, contact information for the next election for the union groups.
No, not at all. That's if we're contacting and re-engaging communities in the political process. We've been finding ourselves disengaged from the process ever since 2008. The healthcare battle was a huge divisive issue for our community. And then now you see 2010, we didn't show up for the general election in 2010. You look at the voting numbers in Pontiac, Flint, Detroit, we're disinterested because our issues aren't on the table. This is an issue that we have on the table, and we'll turn out.
Mr. Jessup, I'm sorry I have to cut off the conversation. Thanks for joining us in the program. Appreciate
I enjoyed you.
All right.
You
Also, that's unusual. Our thanks to Ron and Stephanie and Kyle. Don't forget our email address, otr@wkar.org.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by a grant from Truscott Rossman, Michigan's only bipartisan strategic communications firm, serving statewide, national, and international clients from their offices in Lansing, Detroit, and Grand Rapids. TruscottRossman.com. By the Michigan Food and Beverage Association, in conjunction with the Michigan Business and Professional Association, working together for its members. Membership information on the web at michbusiness.org. And by Hager Fox Heating and Air Conditioning Company, providing comfort to mid-Michigan homes and businesses since 1941. Hager Fox and Bryant, for whatever it takes, on the web at hagerfox.com. Off the Record with Tim Skubick is available for instant viewing as video download, or you can purchase a copy for your video library. For more information, visit wkar.org.
Michigan public TV stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record with Tim Skubick.